back to Action Hour with the Whidbey Environmental Action Network. This episode is part one of a three-part conversation that Marianne, Steve, and I had about three crucial pieces of legislation that have had monumental impact on environmental regulations in Washington state: the Growth Management Act, the Shoreline Management Act, and the State Environmental Policy Act, known respectively as the GMA, the SMA, and SEPA. Okay, so how do we want to begin this conversation? I know I sent you both a list of questions, but I guess a question I have for you is, do we want to walk through them in the order that they were written, or do we want to walk through the GMA first? How does this, in terms of how these pieces of legislation interact with each other and what we want people to know about them, what do you think? Where should we start?
Probably we should start with SEPA.
Okay.
I'm going to be looking at it here. Back in the late 60s, environmentalism, if you will, went mainstream. And the result, of course, was the first Earth Day. And in the wake of that, a whole slew of national environmental legislation got passed. Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. And the important thing to realize about NEPA is that it is basically procedural. It's a look before you leap act. It doesn't say there's going to be a particular outcome. It just says that the decision makers are going to look before they leap, and they have to do that. In the wake of NEPA, lots of states, and Washington was among the earliest, adopted what are called the little NEPAs, the state level environmental policy acts. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you'll see people get the name wrong and call it the State Environmental Protection Act. It is not environmental protection, it is policy. And again, it is look before you leap. Mm-hmm. Now, some parts of SEPA are really good. For instance, it requires taking a look at cumulative impacts. But from the get-go, major areas of development have been exempted. For instance, residential development has generally been exempt. Single-family residents, which of course in rural portions of the state are much of the major development. Logging is exempt for all practical purposes, unless it's being done by the state on state lands, and it's at pretty much the programmatic level, then it's exempt. Private lands logging for all practical purposes is exempt, unless they're about to cut down a bald eagle nest. The legislature has declared it, so keep that in mind. Logging in the state is governed by the Forest Practices Act, not on your list here, but that's the one act that kind of overrules all of the other environmental legislation. Forest Practices Act, unless the land is going to be converted to development within 6 years, or I should say, unless the company doing the logging or the landowner declares that it will be so converted, then it's exempt from the Growth Management Act. It's exempt from SEPA generally, with a few exceptions. Mm-hmm. So somehow, despite the decreasing economic importance of logging in the timber industry in the state, it still rules supreme over virtually every other land use.
That is really interesting to know, and we'll have to get into that.
Yeah, that's a really deep can of worms.
Yeah, right. I actually wanted to read for people because I found so the State Environmental Policy Act and the Shoreline Management Act were passed in the same year, 1971. And when I was going through and actually reading these acts, I thought the statement of purpose in each of them was actually really hopeful and inclusive in a way that I didn't expect the legislation to read like. And so I kind of just want to read the purpose statement from the State Environmental Policy Act for the audience. The purposes of this chapter are to declare a state policy which will encourage productive and enjoyable harmony between humankind and the environment, to promote efforts which will prevent or eliminate damage to the environment and biosphere, and to stimulate the health and welfare of human beings, and to enrich the understanding of the ecological systems and natural resources important to the state and nation. It's just so, it's like, it sounds great.
It does, doesn't it? We were so hopeful and optimistic back then. Yeah.
Steve, a little background, give a little background on where things were. I mean, it's 1970.
Right.
Earth Day.
There was, Earth Day had just happened. NEPA had gotten passed at the federal level. That whole suite of what are now really bedrock environmental laws at the national level. Recently, many of them rolled back by the Supreme Court, but it was all optimistic back then, and it was pretty obvious, you're dealing with rivers that caught fire. You weren't dealing with pernicious toxins that, are awful in parts per trillion. So, overall, the result of this whole suite of environmental laws, and I'm going to say that's true at the state level too, has been that many battles have been won and the overall war continues to be lost.
Yeah.
We're going to use the war analogy there.
Yeah.
I think in part, when you read the purpose statement in SEPA there, that very first thing, people and the environment. It continues that Western duality, if you will. People are separate from the environment. And that is very much embedded in our culture and our civilization. And there are efforts by some to kind of attack that at its base, but it's very difficult. So that's an underlying problem, that's embedded in our law that comes from our entire, sociology, if you will, our entire culture.
Right. The idea that humankind and ecosystems are not, like that humankind is not a part of ecosystems, that they are separate.
And you'll see that pretty much continually throughout the entire legal structure. For instance, wilderness is a place where people go and don't remain. Of course, the indigenous people hear things like that, who are still kind of in touch with their roots, and they go, For obvious reasons, it doesn't make any sense, really. And, some societies around the world, some countries are putting right to clean environment. People are part of the environment, right into their constitutions. The U.S. doesn't have anything like that. So corporations are people for purposes of the law, but a tree is not, an ecosystem is not.
Right. And so when it comes to SEPA, which you mentioned is policy, not protection, which I think is an important distinction that in my head, I had to remind myself that it wasn't the State Environmental Protection Act.
I frequently see journalists getting that wrong.
Yeah. And so what does that mean for it to be policy and not protection? And then how does this policy act, how is it enacted? How do we see? Yeah.
So basically, it's a full disclosure law, and many a development has, big development, been torn apart based on that they didn't really disclose the impacts. So you get into legal situations arguing about the adequacy of an environmental impact statement, which brings me to the basic way it works. In theory, there is a proposal. It could be an action. We're going to build a highway. It could be a policy. We are considering how we're going to move people around. Okay. That undergoes environmental review.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's decided that it will have a probable significant adverse environmental impact.
Mm-hmm.
Probable is not a statistical test.
Okay.
Okay. But if it will have a probable significant adverse environmental impact, then you must examine that and disclose it by means of an environmental impact statement. And environmental impact statements tend to be big things.
And that's like from how I understand it, that's kind of the core of SEPA as it pertains to local legislature, that if you are doing an action or moving people, like you said, that you are required to conduct an environmental impact statement. That's part of it, right? Or no?
Not only if it will have a probable significant adverse environmental impact.
So how is that determined?
So there is a process here. That's why it's the Policy Act. And I just got done advising someone on this.
Mm-hmm.
SEPA requires that when a proposal is sufficiently defined to be able to do review, then at that stage, it is required that environmental review be done. And that is done via the vehicle, if you will, of a SEPA checklist. The checklist is, if it were hard copy, it would be 10 or 11 or 12 pages of questions. And the applicant fills in the checklist, or usually it's the applicant's consultant who fills in the checklist. Mm-hmm. And the reviewing party, the planner or agency, then reviews the SEPA checklist. Generally, they accept it at face value, which drives me crazy. Anyway, based on their review of the checklist, there are three options. There is the determination of non-significance, DNS, meaning not a problem, you're good to go. There is a determination of significance, a DS. We have a problem here. Next step is the environmental impact statement.
Okay.
Then there is the third one, which is the mitigated determination of non-significance, MDNS, which says, well, we got a few problems here, but if you do this, 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 and this, then we'll call it good. Okay. And that then lists those conditions that must be met in order to overcome the significance.
Okay.
And yeah.
I was going to say, so those are the three potential courses of action.
Yeah.
So for the mitigated one, are timelines or deadlines set depending on each given circumstance, or is there like a process that requires these things to be done within a certain amount of time?
It's usually built into the permitting process.
Okay.
So, you wanted to build, 100 apartments in the wetland. No, we're not going to allow that. The mitigation is that you have to move your development 50 feet to the west outside of the wetland. So that gets incorporated into the permit process.
Okay. So
that's later.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So,
I can tell you that the overwhelming majority of applications get a rubber stamp DNS. We're good to go.
Okay.
A vanishingly small number of applications get a DS, and that whole process starts, and it's a big process. And so I would say probably 85 or more % of applications get a DNS. Mm-hmm. Maybe 10 to 15% get an MDNS. So with mitigating conditions, you're good to go. And it's probably less than 1% that get a DS. So it's quite rare. It's a very high threshold.
Okay. And then the environmental impact statement itself. So what is that process?
Okay, so having been issued a DS, the first thing is that the applicant inevitably appeals and says, you are wrong. This does not meet that threshold. And then we go through a round or two of that. When the applicant finally says, all right, we'll do it. The first step is what's called the scoping.
Okay.
So they have to put out a document inviting the public to comment on the proposal, to discuss the scope of the proposal, and those things are not the scope of the proposal, the scope of the review. Yes, we have wetlands here. We have steep slopes. We have traffic issues. There happens to be a toxic waste dump here. So all of the issues that members of the public say need to be addressed in the EIS are brought forward in the scoping process.
Okay, so this is the part where people can participate in the environmental impact statement process in their local government.
Yes.
Yes. And so this is an important thing for people to know. So in Island County, for example, you said that SEPA and the environmental impact statement is a part of the permitting process.
Yes.
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 And so, if someone were to, I guess, apply for a permit and then be found that they need to conduct an environmental impact statement, is that like, how would that, I guess, could you give me an example of like what somebody might be trying to do in Island County, and like what would that process look like, and where would the public get to comment?
Okay, so the jurisdictions are in the process of reviewing and updating their comprehensive plans and zoning ordinances.
Yes.
And that includes critical area ordinances. And it doesn't always happen, but it is foreseeable that there might be a requirement to do an environmental impact statement. If, for instance, a critical areas ordinance changed radically, then there would be the likely probability that there would be environmental impacts associated with that change.
Yes.
And then it would probably be the planning department would issue a determination of significance. And the bizarre part is that when agencies go through this process, they are their own reviewers.
Oh.
So if the Public Works Department decided to build a new road, they would probably issue themselves a DNS.
Right.
And then, we don't even want to get into the appeals process. There is one. But, okay, so in this, theoretical instance, the planning department determines that we're going to throw out half our critical areas ordinance, and that is likely to have an adverse environmental impact. So we will issue ourselves a determination of significance. And then the first step is to put out a public notice that says we have issued a determination of significance for this proposal, in this case, a change to the code. And we are requesting comments on the scoping. What will be the scope of this review? And there will be a public notice, and I think it's usually, what is it, Steve, 30 days? On
Scoping, yeah, you said 30.
Yeah.
Sometimes 60.
Okay, yeah, if it's a really big one, it's 60 days, but that's usually at the state or federal level.
Okay.
So during that period, members of the public submit all manner of comments as to what needs to be addressed in the EIS. That gets taken home and they munge that together, and parts of it are very public. So they usually put together a compendium, a spreadsheet of all of the comments and, 23 comments addressed this particular issue, 79 comments addressed that issue, and that becomes a part of the EIS. And then they essentially list all of the issues out of the multiple comments they've gotten. They boil it down to here are the 7 or 10 or 15 or however many issues that can be identified based on all of these comments.
Okay.
And then they proceed to address all those issues in a document. And depending, excuse me, on the proposal, I mean, we've seen EISs that run into the thousands of pages.
Wow.
Certainly. Oh, well, sure. The not in our parks. When the Navy proposed to use our state parks for clandestine training, they did at the federal level. They did something called Steve. What was it? It was a E. It was an E. Yeah. Wait a minute. But it was an EA.
Yeah, an environmental assessment.
Environmental assessment. And then the state parks department, rather than doing their own environmental review of the proposal, simply adopted the EA and said, here we are, we're good.
Right. This is what the Navy was also trying to do as it pertains to expanding their growler program in the what is the Valley? I forget, but
in the Metau.
Metau, yeah, because they had done an EA instead of an environmental impact statement. And
the thing is, an environmental assessment, and I reviewed all however many thousand pages it was of the EA, and I wrote some wicked comments. But because of the way it was done, State Parks was able to circumvent the need for them to do their own independent analysis. Yeah, okay, they tried. The judge nailed them.
Yeah, but I guess so it's interesting because you say that agencies they're really reviewing themselves in a lot of cases. So there's not a lot of external accountability, it seems like.
Right. That's right.
And then yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, it just seems like, would you say that that's a flaw in the policy act itself or in the process or the implementation of that act?
Absolutely. Yes, it's a serious flaw. I mean, I think, we've all been taught that the old checks and balances thing that you have to have somebody else check your homework.
Yeah.
And in this case, the agencies check their own homework, and it's not a surprise that all kinds of things slide by.
Yeah, no, it doesn't really seem like it's a surprise at all.
New lead agency.
In SEPA, you have what is called the lead agency. The lead agency is the agency that reviews the checklist and makes the determination whether or not the proposal will have probable significant adverse environmental impacts, warranting a DS, or whether it just gets an MDNS or an DNS. SEPA is replete with these alphabet soup stuff. So the lead agency generally is the agency that's, in charge here. For example,
it reviews the proposal.
Yeah, that reviews the proposal. For example, in Island County, it, I believe now is the planning director or the designee. There was a time in Island County where the county commissioners were at war with the planning department, and so they put all that responsibility on the head of public works, which made absolutely no sense. Now, if an agency is proposing a project, say the Port Commission proposed to do a project, they would likely be their own lead agency. Now, sometimes another agency may say, we have expertise or authority here, and we should be the lead agency. And there's a mechanism in SEPA where they can assume lead agency status, and there can even be conflicts about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty unusual, actually. Okay, so most of what you'll see in SEPA is a DNS, as Marianne said, or an MDNS, mitigated determination of non-significance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, SEPA mitigation means, and I'm going to read these to you.
Good.
1, avoiding the impacts altogether by not taking a certain action or parts of an action. 2, minimizing impacts by limiting the degree or magnitude of the action and its implementation by using appropriate technology or by taking affirmative steps to avoid or reduce impacts. 3, rectifying the impact by repairing, rehabilitating, or restoring the affected environment.
Mm-hmm.
4, reducing or eliminating the impact over time by preservation and maintenance operations during life of the action. 5, compensating for the impact by replacing, enhancing, or providing substitute resources or environments. And or 6, monitoring the impact and taking appropriate corrective measures.
Mm-hmm.
So most jurisdictions have now taken this to mean, and it generally is done that way in terms of what's called mitigation sequencing, which basically holds that these are in order of preference. Mm-hmm. First, you avoid the impact if you can. Second, you minimize the impact. Third, you rectify the impact. Fourth, you reduce the impact over time. Fifth, you compensate for the impact. And 6, you monitor the impact and take corrective measures again over time. So avoidance is always the first priority.
Yeah.
So, if somebody, for instance, proposes to build a house in a wetland,
right,
then the logical agency response under SEPA is, can we avoid this? Do you have to build your house in the wetland? Can't you put it somewhere else?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then, minimize the impact. Well, okay. Can you elevate the house over the wetland there? Can you put it on piers?
Can you move it to the edge of the wetland?
Yeah, well, that's avoiding. Well, that's kind of reducing, actually.
Yeah, it's reducing.
Yeah, so I mean, the line between these can be a little fuzzy, but that mitigation sequencing requirement is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody from jumping all the way to the end here, we're going to build the house in the wetland, even though we don't have to, and we're going to create a wetland somewhere else, which is, has a very poor record of success.
Yeah.
Place the function.
Do you have to do it in order? Is that because of the sequencing? You have to try to avoid first. You have to avoid it at all costs if you can, and then if you cannot, then you go to number 2.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So
that's why it's called sequencing.
That's why it's called sequencing.
Yeah.
Now, SEPA, most of the actions you're going to see where SEPA is invoked are going to involve either a critical area,
mm-hmm.
a stream, steep slope, steep unstable slope, something like that, or it's going to generally involve an agency action, the county's updating its comprehensive plan, or it's updating its comprehensive plan. Washington Department of Transportation wants to move a chunk of the highway, that kind of thing.
Okay.
It's rare, in Island County for a private party to do a development that in and of itself is sufficient to, end up needing an environmental impact statement. So.
Howdy Severs when he proposed to
that was a long time ago. I'm talking about the modern era, not 1975.
But if someone proposed an industrial park, that would probably trigger.
If somebody proposed to do an industrial park in Island County, let's say they proposed it on some land that was zoned rural.
Mm-hmm.
So that would require a rezone by the county, which is a GMA action.
Okay.
And that would likely trigger SEPA. Now, let's say they propose to do an industrial park at what's now called Whidbey Air Park, or Porter's Field, as we used to call it, which is basically zoned for something like that, light industry. Yeah. And then it would probably depend on what it was they were actually proposing to do. If we're going to set up a small scale furniture factory, and it's going to have air filtration on any emissions, and the road's privately owned, and we might have to end up paying for a new entrance onto the highway there or something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But let's say they proposed we're going to open a chemical plant that's going to sterilize medical waste. Okay. All of a sudden, you're talking about some serious impacts potentially.
Right.
Or as happened back in the 1970s, when the county's regulations were, shall we say, almost non-existent, a company that got run out of Norway and then got run out of Everett.
That was in the 80s.
In the 80s, early 80s, Norfloat making PVC buoys. PVC is nasty stuff.
Yeah.
When it's hot and being molded. And they got to locate basically, it was either in a wetland or right on the edge.
No, it's dead ass.
Yeah, okay. In an area that is, basically residential. And they got to do that back then. And there was no, I don't think that any SEPA was ever done on that. Was it?
The one that in the margin he had written, let this one.
Yes, that was back when we had a county planning director who approved it and wrote in the margin, we'll let this one slide. Next time we'll require SEPA.
And this was on the island?
This was on the island. The place is still there. Now it's just kind of used as warehousing, so nothing nasty about it.
Yeah. So over time, there have been more, because, SEPA's been around since 1971, but it sounds like Island County didn't have the infrastructure to.
In fact, some of the very early SEPA litigation involved Island County, especially the proposal to turn the spit at Crockett Lake into Keystone Spit into a high density, shore community, basically.
50 houses on it.
Yeah. And that got part way and got shut down, and State Department of Ecology was involved. Mm-hmm. And there was litigation around that. Swift v. Island County, save Whidbey Island for tomorrow.
Mm. Well, so you've mentioned that SEPA can be triggered. And I'm curious about that in terms of like how, like, I guess I understand in some ways what an environmental impact statement is and, why it needs to be conducted, but how is it even introduced? Like, how is SEPA introduced into these situations? For example, development, right? Like at what point, in the process of that was this enacted or triggered?
So all of those permit applications that I review, mm-hmm. Integral in those applications is the SEPA process. So the applicant approaches Island County Planning and says, I want to subdivide my property and put 4 houses here. Mm-hmm. And the staff give them the equivalent of a pile of paperwork. Nowadays, they say, go to this website and check all of these off. And a part of that, integral to it, is that SEPA checklist.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
so
okay.
It's just part of the application process.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay, but they're self-identifying with this checklist, right? That's another part of the thing where it's like in the same way that the lead agency is reviewing itself, you have people with their applications determining for themselves with varying degrees of education and knowledge about whether or not they're.
As a matter of fact, one of my specialties over the years has been reviewing SEPA checklists.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I tear them apart when the various shoreline applications, one of the earliest questions on the checklist, are there other actions or proposals relating to this property or this project? And they inevitably say no. However, if one thinks about sea level rise, how long is it going to be before you want to make that bulkhead that much higher?
Right.
So, yes, they do self-identify. And back when the SEPA checklist was a piece of paper, well, it was, 11 sheets stapled together. It was literally done so that the questions were on 2/3 of the page and the right-hand 1/3 of the page was blank so that the reviewing staff could make their notes. So staff was supposed to review and correct obvious errors.
Okay.
And I've seen tons of them. Is there any possibility of contaminating groundwater? No. I mean, it's always no, no, no. And
because if you were just trying to go through and to get what you wanted, you would say no to everything, right?
basically.
Yeah.
So, one of the questions is how much area of impervious surface are you going to generate?
What's impervious surface?
Well, the roof on your house is impervious. Your driveway is impervious, most likely. The roads are impervious. Water cannot travel through it.
Okay. All right.
And the reason it's a major issue is the rain that falls on our ground percolates into the soil, which is pervious, and feeds the aquifer. And then we have our wells out back, and we pump that water back up and use it in our kitchen. When you create impervious surface, that water does not percolate back into the soil. It becomes, instead of being a very much needed resource, it becomes a problem.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's not perking in. It has to be, you have rain gutters and drains and it becomes stormwater. That's the definition. And it gets basically routed off of the land as quickly as possible. So there are limits on how much impervious surface you can create in a development. So when the SEPA checklist wants to know what percentage of your site is going to be impervious surface, there's a certain tendency to fudge.
Right. Which you and I have talked about as it pertains to the watershed too, right? And how that process works, and the fact that this island in particular relies on its aquifer for all of its water. And so that would be particularly important, I would think, in terms of overall permitting.
So all of the islands, the San Juans, Whidbey, Camano, the islands further south, all of the islands are in effect sole source aquifers.
Okay,
what down and percolates in is what you pump back out.
And so this is just one of the many things on the SEPA checklist that people need to, that likely somebody who's submitting this permit application is not an expert in.
Well, many of them hire consultants.
Yeah.
And then I rip apart the consultants because they're fudging too. The consultants theoretically know better.
Right. Theoretically.
Yeah. So, it's my, self-imposed job to rip apart those SEPA checklists and present my information and objections to the staff member doing the review. And if I am lucky and they are conscientious, they will get back to the landowner and say, would you please look at questions number 10, 11, 12, and 23 and respond more completely, more accurately.
But you're doing this you're doing this and you're not a part of a government agency, and,
Nope.
and you are taking it upon yourself to be this measure of accountability and to create a checks and balances system, and you are one person doing this in one county. So it makes me think about all the other counties and their processes, and whether or not there are people like you doing this elsewhere. And
Not
if
enough.
not, yeah, right. So there's a lot that's falling through the cracks, it seems, in this.
Yes. And it depends entirely on the various planning departments, how knowledgeable, how conscientious, and how much pressure they're getting from upstairs. As we've seen this in the past, that a county commissioner going to planning staff and, hovering over them as they're sitting at their desk and saying, give that one a go. And I mean, try and prove it. You can't prove it. I mean, it's the word of the planner saying, I had to do it because the commissioner told me to.
Right.
That happens.
And it's interesting because this kind of makes me think of the Growth Management Act, which we would have to go ahead about 20 years to 1990 when this was passed. But, the beginning of that act says, the legislature finds that uncoordinated and unplanned growth, together with a lack of common goals expressing the public's interest in the conservation and the wise use of our lands, pose a threat to the environment, sustainable economic development, and the health, safety, and high quality of life enjoyed by residents of this state. That's how it begins. And it's interesting, as you're saying this, that all of the things falling through the cracks in this process would actually not be in concert with the purpose and designation of the Growth Management Act.
Yep.
So I don't know where we want to go with this, whether there's more you all want to say about SEPA, because this is about to be a whole episode on SEPA, which is fine. We can break these up. That's the thing. We can, but where do you want to go next? Or what do you want to
a little bit more on SEPA here.
Yeah. Okay. Let's keep going with SEPA.
Understand how this works. Notice published in the newspaper. And if it's a project action, that's to say it's not somebody doing, it's not the Port Commission's plan or something like that, but it's an actual project. Then there's supposed to be a notice posted on the property where it's visible.
Okay.
Typically, that'll be one of those yellow signs in Island County. And it's supposed to be published in the newspaper twice. Now, under GMA, they can say this will be your only opportunity to comment on the environmental impacts. We're not going to do a separate SEPA process. We're going to roll it together with the other permitting process. Okay, and that happens a lot. And you have 2 weeks from when you see that notice in the paper or when you see the notice, on the property. You have 2 weeks to comment.
Okay.
Speak then or forever hold your peace. In fact, SEPA says failure to comment is considered as you have no problem with it.
Acceptance.
So if the public doesn't comment within a 2-week period, they're like, you're good with it. And this is for permits in particular?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
SEPA's involved. Okay.
Okay.
Then there's 2 weeks after that. And after 2 weeks, then the environmental determination, the DNS or the MDNS or the DS becomes final.
Okay.
And if you were going to appeal, that's the point at which you must then appeal.
Okay.
So I won't follow that down the rabbit hole. The only other thing you need to realize with SEPA is that it's a very powerful tool, could be a very powerful tool for addressing, in particular, cumulative impacts.
Okay.
And when we use the war analogy, losing war out there, even though we're winning individual battles, those cumulative impacts are basically it. It's not one single house. It's not one single development. It's the sheer weight of all of them together on our biosphere. The other thing to realize is that SEPA has what are called categorical exemptions. They keep getting longer and longer as the legislature meddles with it more and more and more. So before there were a few, now there are many, many, many categorical exemptions. If you're in an urban area, almost every kind of housing now, housing development is categorically exempt from SEPA review in an urban area.
Well, up to 30 units, up to 30 units.
Up to 200 units if it's multifamily now in an urban area.
That's not what I just saw, but okay.
That's what's in SEPA. That's what's in the rules.
Okay.
No. Now, I don't think the version I have here incorporates the changes made by the legislature this year. And I tell you right now, it didn't get any better.
Okay. So you're saying like in an urban environment, there are exempt, and this is just one of many, many exemptions, but there are, you know, a developer building in Seattle, for example, doesn't have to consider environmental impact when building.
Yeah.
Right.
Or a forest landowner doesn't have to consider environmental impact if they're spraying pesticides or herbicides that are approved for use, and it's not in a drinking water, drinking water watershed. Okay. You know,
Okay. So there. Okay. So you can spray pesticides without a review if it's been determined that it's not in a watershed.
If it's in I could find it again, but if it's in an area that is controlled for drinking water, such as, you know, Seattle's watershed.
Okay.
You know, something like that. You know, almost all logging is exempt. Just all logging. Conversions to a non-forest use when they're going to develop are not exempt. But
yeah, but there's just like huge list of exemptions, and it keeps getting longer.
Yeah, it gets longer and longer every year. The exemptions, kind of like what's happened with the Public Disclosure Act, Public Records Act. But let's not go there.
Yeah.
So let's leave it at that for purposes of SEPA now, is that it is sometimes a very powerful tool, but oftentimes it's not any more valuable than a wet Kleenex. So,
Okay.
It can be useful at times.
It can be useful, but maybe not as effective. Yeah, and keeps being chipped away as time goes on. Like its potential for effectiveness. In the next episode, we will continue this conversation with Steve and Marianne and go into the Shoreline Management Act. And then in the episode after that, we will finally get to the Growth Management Act. Stay tuned, and we hope you'll come back for the next episode and continue to learn with us. See you next time.
Another man up in the pulpit in the State House. Head of the table with a black pen, scratching egos, talking too loud. Externalize every outcome, every warm gun, every profit. Kneeling down to the flashing numbers, the NASDAQ, the cold constructs. Running backwards to just keep moving, just keep moving, just keep moving. Unlearning every lesson that our mothers tried to teach us.
This podcast is a production of the Whidbey Environmental Action Network and is made possible by our generous donors. Produced, edited, and mixed by me, Amanda Bullis. Special thanks to Marianne and Steve for their years of service through action and for lending their voices to this podcast. To WEEN's Executive Director, Marnie Jackson, and our board for their leadership. Special thanks to Whidbey musician and WEEN board member Nathaniel Talbot for letting us use his track, Intuition, from the album Animal, available on Bandcamp.
Every day on your paycheck, a volume of confidence against the idea of your body being put into your own hand. So please don't hold it, please don't hold it, please don't hold it back. Unleash the power, straight logic of compassion. What I need now ain't that old religion or the cold hard facts. Just need a woman's intuition, get us on track. Just need a woman's intuition, get us on track. Stepping out of the shadow of a false man's allegory, slowly erasing that old violence from the story. Recoupling emotion, slow emotion to intelligence, granting the planters, healers, teachers, feelers a new relevance. What I need now ain't that old religion or the cold hard